episode of Feeding Fatty. I'm your host, Roy.
I'm Terry.
Of course, we are the podcast journaling, chronicling our journey through this wellness process. You know, in the beginning, we talked a lot about diet, not necessarily a diet, but, you know, what we eat, what we're trying to cut down on and be more healthy eating. We also talk a lot about exercise, getting out and moving, and we talk about mindset as well. That has kind of been the point it's led us to. A lot of people know what they should be doing, trying to get in the right mindset to make the change and then also to make it sustainable. That seems to be the difficulty and the challenge for us. But anyway, we also bring guests on from time to time, experts in the field, and today's no different. We are very lucky to have Robert Yoho with us, and I'm going to let Terry introduce him.
Yeah, Robert Yoho is 67 years old. He has spent 3 decades as a cosmetic surgeon after a career as an emergency physician. His generalist training gives him perspective and allows him to avoid favoring any medical specialty. He's had little dealings with hospitals, big pharma, or insurance companies before he wrote his book, Butchered by Healthcare. No one has ever considered him a whale prescriber or a device implanter. He retired from the medical practice in 2019, 1999. Dr. Yoho, thank you so much for being on this show. We're so happy to have you as a guest.
Thanks, Terry. Well, let me just go over my sequence, which led to my interest in this field.
Please.
Okay. Yeah, of all things, I did a career in cosmetic surgery, doing breast implants, liposuction, facial beautification, all that stuff. And I had 2 people in 6 months die in my offices.
Oh, wow.
And so that was quite a time for introspection. And one of them I wasn't even operating on, but it still was a heck of a shock. And, cosmetic surgeons or plastic surgeons usually have 1 fatality in surgery during their careers. And I'd had 2 in a very short sequence. So I started thinking and reading, and I started uncovering what I later started to think of as medical corruption. And so the basic, I'm listening to your guys' podcasts, and I see it's an interesting process because you have not had chronic diseases. You haven't had to worry about your health. You're pawing your way through this material and thinking you're smelling a rat somewhere, that there's something. And I can tell you after 4 years of studying this material, there's a lot wrong. And the bottom line is that we spend twice what the other developed countries spend per person, twice what Japan, Great Britain, France, and so on, and Canada spends per person. In other words, we spend nearly 20% of our gross domestic product on healthcare, wow, right? And twice as much per person. And the worst part is we get a bad product, okay? In other words, we have earlier infant mortality, and it's not an academic controversy. 50% of what we do either doesn't work or actually is harmful. And there's many references for that. You can look at my book, Butchered by Healthcare, to get more detail. But it doesn't work. Now, the simple bottom line for how this all developed is we rained money out of the sky on our healthcare providers and the healthcare industry. We gave them our insurance money, we gave them our federal Medicare money, and it was when free money happens, there's a lot of people come around to scoop it up. And these are entrepreneurs, or possibly criminals, that got into this thing. Now, I'm not saying it's all bad. I don't want to make that message. Half of it works, and half of it's important. And we have new therapies for certain things that are profoundly effective. But and the way these people have influenced our prescribing in the medical devices and the insurance industry is essentially through bribery. Now, bribery is a technical term. That term means something in legal jargon. So I really shouldn't use that term, but it's anytime money changes hands, the well is poisoned. And as you'll see when we go through these various medical specialties, there's a lot of money changing hands between industry and the rest of the medical service providers. I mean, it's a phenomenal thing. And so the important point, which you can read if you start looking at influence theory and psychology, is that any amount of money changing hands profoundly affects the person's behavior. Even taking a woman out to dinner and serving her a nice meal, you can get benefits that are far beyond the cost of that meal. You know, that's the simple thing. The drug reps come into our offices, feed us food, and we think it doesn't influence our behavior, but it does. Yeah. And it's a terrible thing. So that's the basic setup of medical care worldwide, but particularly in America. And before I let you guys start the questions, I'm just going to tell you the 3 central insights I had during my study of this. And I didn't learn this right away. But the first one I've already mentioned, and that's the updated golden rule. And that is, those with the gold make the rules, right? And the second is science is being used to obscure the truth, okay? So if you don't understand it, Roy, that doesn't mean you're a dummy. What that means is somebody is BSing, you know, because you're just as smart as a storyteller, you're smart as the average physician. And sometimes if you learn too much detail, that actually obscures the truth, because you don't need to be an academic to judge ethics. The last thing is, and this is the important one, if there's controversy about something, that doesn't mean that there's controversy. That means that it doesn't freaking work, right? If there's controversy, confusion, or contradictory evidence, don't fall into the trap of believing reasonable people disagree, because you know, and I know, they've studied hundreds, if not thousands of patients to produce the controversy. So forget about it. It doesn't work. So you read a study, it says, we don't know for sure, or they got these barely statistically significant figures or something like that. It means it doesn't work. Yeah. So that's a good rule of thumb. I mean, I can't state that in an absolutely blanket fashion, but it is a good place to start. So ask me anything you want. I can develop the medical specialties or the insurance industry, or, you know, a lot of other areas where we've essentially gone off the rails.
I was going to say, man, I got a flood of those. But let's start out with your first concept, the golden rule, the people with the money make the rule, because there's not only a lot of influence between the pharmaceuticals and the doctors, but I would suspect with lobbyists and everything else, there's a lot with our lawmakers as well.
Yeah, the lobby for healthcare is far bigger than oil and gas and banking combined. It's monstrous. Pharma has a $1.3 trillion gross worldwide, and it's well over half the profits occur in the United States and 40% of the sales. It might be 70 or 80% of the profits. So these guys have money to burn.
Okay. One other thing I just now thought of this when you were doing your intro is there a way to track the if I'm a drug maker, can I track the doctors that are prescribing? Yeah. Is that?
Oh, they track exactly who it is, and here's how they do it. They go to the pharmacy and they get the prescriber number, and then they go to the AMA, and the AMA sells them the doctor's name that associates with the prescriber number. Yeah. The AMA is a very economic organization. They shouldn't be doing this, in my opinion.
Yeah, because it's... Oh, go ahead, Terry.
No, I was just going to say, it's just backlinks. It's like SEO, computerized everything. It's all... I don't even know where I was going with that, because I have so many things running through my head, I can't even form a good question.
Let me give you a stunning example of how money pollutes. I mean, this one is going to be hard for you guys to believe, but oncology is one of the most heavily influenced, or cancer therapy, the cancer doctors, is one of the most heavily influenced specialties. And the reason is, well over half of their incomes come from retailing cancer drugs. They get about 25%, and the average cancer drug costs $100,000 a year. So these guys have these chairs, right? The cancer chemotherapy chairs. The more chairs they have and the more patients they have, the more they can bill. And they clip 25% off the top of the drug's price. Now, you think this is terrible, but it gets worse. It gets worse. This would be if a doctor sold them the drug, sold another doctor the drug, it would be called capping. It's a federal crime. They put both of them in jail. But the drug companies are allowed to do this because of some sort of exception. Now it gets even worse.
Uh-oh.
They are rewarded by the milligram. In other words, larger doses make more money for them. So
Oh.
they are incentivized to prescribe very high doses of whatever the most expensive thing is. Now, I mean, doctors have integrity. We're trained to have ethics in a way that no other industry is. And, we're a pretty good bunch. But I just want to say that there's no way anyone can get around a financial incentive, even a small one. And these guys, well over half of their income on average comes from sales of these drugs that they deliver in the office. Some of the other specialties, like the guys doing the testosterone blockers, like Lupron, to the best of my knowledge, they get, the shot costs $10,000 or whatever the heck it is, takes 2 minutes. The doctor gets 25%.
Wow.
It's crazy.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I mean, it's absolutely crazy. And that was a whole nother story. And it's a very damaging drug of questionable utility, according to Otis Brawley, who was the head of the American Cancer Society until recently. He thinks that it does more harm than good on average, because the drug actually, the prostate cancer is the fatalities are cut by a third by using that drug. It sounds great, right? But the drug causes so many problems, the overall fatalities probably go up.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just crazy.
Yeah, and it kind of not jokingly, but not jokingly, we listen to, especially during the evening news, when we listen to these commercials, and they come out with the drug that helps you with this, and then they've got 10 minutes worth.
There's only
of,
2 countries in the world, Roy, that allow that. Yeah, that's direct-to-consumer advertising.
Yeah.
It's an outrage. It got slowly slanted into our system over a period of 5 to 10 years when they finally figured out there were no direct laws against it. And it's a complicated political battle, but these pharmaceutical companies is very effective.
Yeah.
It's very effective, even though you're not sure what the hell it is when they're talking about
Right.
it on the TV. Ask your doctor, and then they go in and ask the doctors, and the doctors are so busy. What are they going to do? A lot of times they just write for the drug.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and the other thing I was going to say is they have like 10 minutes worth of the side effects that this may cause. I mean, and some of the side effects that they list, it's like, wow, I would rather have whatever they're trying to treat is not near as harmful as all these potential side effects that they have. It's crazy.
The studies are frequently obscure the side effects, and they measure, they're looking under the money tree and not the tree of truth.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So Ben Goldacre wrote a book about the frauds involved in pharmaceutical and device studies. And there are, I mean, you cannot imagine what these guys do. They mess with the statistics. They conceal studies that don't, right? And they cherry pick their results in various ways. They change people and put them in the wrong group, so it looks like there are fewer fatalities. I mean, the HPV vaccine, you've heard of that? It's a vaccine for venereal warts that supposedly affects cervical cancer. Well, they concealed 50% of the studies. And in my view, the best commentators at Cochrane, the Cochrane Institute in Europe, which does meta-analyses, they don't think it works, and at least the most sophisticated ones don't think it works. I mean, they're influenced by pharma money also. Yeah. So Japan abandoned the use of HPV, or at least they said it didn't work, to their populace, and their inoculation rate dropped to 1% in 1 year.
Wow.
So that's the truth. They've got a public health system at least as robust as ours, and they don't use HPV vaccine in any consequential fashion. The rest of the world's still on it, pretty much.
Yeah. And
I was going to ask, so what's the role? I know this is open up a can of whoop ass. What's the role of the FDA in all of this? I mean, they just pass?
The FDA, I have a chapter in Butchered by Healthcare about the FDA. And the FDA is the most effective regulatory agency in the world. But unfortunately, they are, since 2003, a law was signed into effect that we could no longer negotiate prices with these these pharma companies, and since then they've just bought everything, and the prices have gone way up. But the the FDA is um, fed, or their revenues come from what's called user fees that the pharmaceutical companies pay them, and well over half of their, some sources say 75% or more of their total budget of $5 billion is it comes from directly from pharma. So they regard pharmaceutical companies as clients rather than entities to be regulated, because if they refuse a drug, sometimes they can't make their own payroll. Now you got to realize the size of these entities they have to regulate. They have $5 billion, which sounds like a lot of money, but pharma is 1.3 trillion worldwide, 40% in the U.S., and the FDA doesn't have a prayer of watching all these factories in India and China. Inside the U.S., they inspect them once a year, and they do a little better job. But in China, they all these there are all these stories about these FDA inspectors getting fed fake facilities and fake paperwork and room. Catherine Eben wrote a book called Bottle of Lies. If you're interested in the FDA and the and all that stuff, it's very illuminating, and it really gives you the feeling that the generics, I think we're 90% generics because we've been so overpriced by the patent drugs. The patent drugs are good quality. They're actually what they are. They're manufactured under strict controls, but they're so expensive. These guys have decided the price point of making them outrageous is the best strategy. And I guess it is. They don't have to do as much, and they sell all these things like bottled gold. And so we are buying 90% of our medications from India and China. It's about half and half. And the generics often are adulterated with some bad ingredient, or they don't work as well. The long-lasting generics, physicians have often discovered that the long-lasting generics they only last 12 hours instead of 36 hours. Cleveland Clinic, it was so bad at Cleveland Clinic that they developed their own mini FDA, and they started testing their own medications, and they found out what worked and what didn't. In Africa and other third world, less advantaged countries that don't even have an FDA, the physicians keep a small stock of the good drug, the actual patent drug, to use on people who are dying, that where the other drug doesn't seem to be working. And so they have to experiment with their patients. But the FDA is a mess. I have insiders' quotes from whistleblowers and so on and so forth. But I mean, it's the best any country has. It's better than the one in Europe, or who are respected, also. Anyway.
Yeah, and it's on the other show that we've talked a little bit about the new release of the
Adulam, the new Alzheimer's drug.
Oh, that's an outrage. Okay, so there are about 10 of these patent Alzheimer's drugs, and they cost probably a couple of $1,000s a month at a minimum. They're very expensive. It might only be $1,000 a month. What a bargain. But even the people who work with those drugs, and you read their papers, they can't claim they freaking work. Yeah. I mean, they have some small effects, but like the rest of these drug studies, they're basically half fake and half concealed, and they use contract research groups out of the country, and if these guys don't produce the results that they want, they never use them again. So anyway, so Alzheimer's is a special case. This is a very interesting subject because Alzheimer's is arguably the most expensive, if long-term care costs are included, it's the most expensive disease of all. Mm-hmm. But we have an excellent thing to prevent Alzheimer's, right? So in my second book on hormones, I showed how estradiol prevents 50 to 80% of all Alzheimer's. I mean, this could save billions of dollars if it was used and not concealed, right? And not derided, basically.
Yeah, with this drug, I'll let Terry speak a little more to it because she's done the research, but this new Adulam, it's $56,000 a year. But what they
No,
found,
a month.
no,
Oh,
a year.
no, it
I
can't
thought it
be
was
a
a
month.
month.
Maybe it
Oh,
is a
sorry.
month.
Yeah.
Year.
So what they did though is they found out
That's 2 years from now. Will be a month.
they found out that the committee that was assigned to assign it or assigned to study it, when they went ahead and said, okay, it's okay for sale, I think 10 of the 11 doctors that were on the panel all resigned because they had all said it's not worth
Doesn't
it.
work.
Well,
There's
it was an 11-member panel. 3 of them resigned, and their vote, the voting on it was 10 of them said no, don't release it, and then 1 was uncertain. And then the FDA went ahead and said, okay, well, they manipulated, it seems like to me, they manipulated the study process or, the results that they got and made it
and then,
okay.
And then now I think there's an investigation into a lot more
This
than
is
just this.
This is a story you'll see over and over and over, and I've got stories like that all through my book. The tragedy of this whole thing, as you guys are finding out, if you have a chronic disease, and Roy has a problem here. I mean, I think your problem's simple compared to someone with cancer. But and the variety of anyway. So, but the tragedy is that you almost need physician level expertise to decipher what the heck to do next.
Weed through
And
everything.
you've got your woman by your side there who can help.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too, kind of getting back to more general terms is I guess what I see or are concerned about is instead of doctors taking the time to find out what is this underlying issue, they would rather prescribe to treat a symptom instead of actually having a conversation.
That's where they get their money, is if they give them the pharmacy, give them the meds.
They are trapped in a system that where their actions are dictated, and even these guys who work for health maintenance organizations, if they don't have prescribing habits that mimic the quote standard of care, which is largely dictated by big pharma, influenced by these standards panels who are paid, each one of the persons on the panel has huge conflict of interest, paid by 2 or 3 pharma companies. For example, antidepressants and statin drugs, right? Both of those should be thinly used, and the damn antidepressants must be 10% of the whole country is on antidepressants.
Oh yeah.
Psych drugs is 15% or more.
Wow.
But the influence is the industry influence is so heavy that your primary care doctor is not an independent actor anymore. He's got an individual license, he's responsible, but he operates under protocols. So they're not innocent, but they're not the real problem. The problem is they're in a matrix. They're in a matrix of control, and the money is so huge that these companies are getting more overt, more obvious about their influence now. In the last year, they all sort of came out of the closet and said, "Do as we tell you, or else." That's my opinion about what happened.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it's unbelievable. I was just going to go down. I was looking at the second one is the science is obscured to hide the truth. And so I just was going to ask, in your opinion, are these clinical trials large enough? Are they lengthy enough to actually, and the problem with anything is that something may be doesn't come to light in the short term, but after you do it for 10, 15, 20 years, all of a sudden now there's a big problem. But again, in your opinion, are we even taking enough time to evaluate these drugs before we release them?
Okay, so Roy, you're asking the right questions, and you guys are trying to paw your way through this mess of data and try to figure out what the heck is going on. And if you want to read about these clinical trials and the frauds, I think the easiest and most approachable book is Ben Goldacre's Bad Pharma, and that's 10 years old. But the answer is that you can hardly trust anything. Now, the doctors we are conditioned to think that double-blind, placebo-controlled trials are the be-all and end-all. But it's a garbage in, garbage out situation, a GIGO situation. And it depends on the intentions of the people who are doing the trial. And so the answer is now anecdotal medicine is almost better than these clinical trials. And it's almost a waste of time to look at them, because if you go to the back of the paper and they're sponsored by the company selling the drug, he with the gold makes the rules, right? So I mean, it's a tragedy, but everyone thinks they mean something. One of my friends says the whole thing has been almost garbage since 2000.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Because the industry is just taking control of freaking everything.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't say this stuff casually. I studied it for 4 years. I've got 500 references in this book.
Wow.
Everything I say is derivative of authors that have come before me. I didn't do original research.
Right.
I read the stuff that was available, and I looked at the references,
Oh my gosh. Just like,
it's shocking, isn't it, Terry?
yeah.
It's shocking. And
I don't want to take anything.
Fortunately, you don't want to take anything. You basically, and I think you guys are on the right track with your keto and your controlled fasting and your prolonged fasting. I think all that stuff, there is better evidence than anything else we have. I think that all the fat stuff's turned around. We want to eat animal fat, and all those narratives about the animal fat is being bad for you. That's all wrong. I mean, that's all food industry driven. And as you may recall, the the FDA is food and drug, right? So they spend half their money, half that $5 billion, regulating the food industry, and they don't do a very good job there. And I've got references. If you're interested in that, if you're interested in the vegan stuff, I have references for that too.
Okay, yeah, I mean that is because we are, we haven't gone total vegan. We are more what we call plant-based, and we eat protein, but it's not the focal point of the meal like it used to. You had the big meat and a side thing of potatoes or whatever. So we've tried to flip that, but it gets back to this thing about. I have read some research. This is not my research, but I've read a number of studies that say, kind of staying with Alzheimer's, is that can be traced back to the low-fat diet of the 70s and 80s, because we need this fat for our brain to keep those receptors lubricated and alive.
Fat, yeah.
I thought that was interesting. I listened to you interview someone who'd given coconut oil for 3 months to someone, and they freaking improved.
Yes.
So who knows? That's another anecdote. I have no expertise about this.
Yeah, that was it was a one person, but it sparked some huge longitudinal studies on that, just to see if this fat intake. But there's been a lot of saying that that's what has caused this huge spike right now, is what we did. And I guess that's kind of our mission too. It's changed a lot on this show, but part of it is, I'll speak for me. I'm going into the older age bracket sooner than I would like to, and so I need to be sure and carry good health, good habits into this. I mean, you can't wait till you're 80 years old and say, "Wow, I need to change some things." I mean, it's probably going to be too late by then.
Well, another clue about my other book, which is the hormone book, is after reviewing all the data for hormones, it's my opinion, and brace yourself, it's my opinion that hormone supplementation over 40 or 50 years old is more important than exercise, possibly as important as diet. You get it? So there's a lot of data on that, a lot of studies, and the standards that are promulgated are a pack of lies. It's crazy. I mean, we've got black box warnings on testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone. Those three are vital, and they can save your life and likely make you live longer. They save your alertness, decrease Alzheimer's. I mean, they have multiple good effects. Anyway,
is that why you think? I mean, do you think that is one of the reasons that Alzheimer's and dementia has increased so much?
No doubt about it. There's no doubt about it. And hormone levels are dropping, sperm counts are dropping, and we have good measurements in men about these trends over the last 20 years. We don't know why. It may be stress, it might be chemicals, it might be, who knows, it might be nutritional. and it might be something else, but for any given age, those are dropping. And it's if we supplement, we can prevent many problems. So
I'm sure that this is difficult to prove collusion, but do you think that there's a link in not releasing certain products because we would rather sell the drugs on instead of being proactive, we'd rather wait and sell the drugs on the back end?
yeah, you have to realize that these companies, they're not evil and they're not good. They're only interested in money, and so they're willing to. There are speculations that they would or do sell things that absolutely don't work in order to make the money, and they can fake the studies. In other words, you do 20 studies, and one of them is statistically significant, and that's the only one you publish. So I mean, they could sell wheatgrass in a pill for God knows what. But it's truly a sad story because some of the things are injurious. There's a class of antidepressants or antipsychotics called atypical antipsychotics. These things are well documented to shorten your life by 10 to 20 years. Wow. Through diabetes and all this other stuff. However, they're getting passed out like jelly beans to people who have simple depressions. The SSRI drugs like Prozac, they cause consequential violence and suicide in a small number. And those guys are passed out very casually. They're exceedingly addictive. And it's basically an outrage. And the whole thing has been covered up since the start. The initial studies for Prozac showed the suicide rate, and that they paid off plaintiff after plaintiff for these things rather than have it brought out. So, I mean, there's a lot of drugs that are no good. And in fact, the whole psychiatric formulary, and I'm not one of those, what do they call it? The anti-psychiatrist religion? Yeah. What is that called? The Scientologist.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not a Scientologist, right? But the Scientologists got this one right. The psychiatrist drugs are the way they're used currently, and that means indiscriminately on almost everyone, with these standards that were essentially fabricated with hand in glove with the pharmaceutical companies. It's an outrage, and that's the most expensive medical specialty. And that whole thing is a mess. I mean, it's truly a mess. And there are a lot of psychiatry is the only specialty that has a massive number of people who are essentially psychiatry deniers. They don't think they should be operating at all. Every other specialty, they're doing something. They're making some mistakes. But psychiatry, the drugs have never been subjected to proper double-blind placebo-controlled trials. I mean, essentially, you can't find anybody.
Oh,
that was Frankie.
You can't find anybody to put on a sugar pill these days because we've got 15% of the country taking these darn drugs.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Yeah, which probably has led up to a lot of the violence that's happening. All these. I'd like to see the
mass violence.
Yeah, I'd love to see a study
every one
to
of those
see
seems to be associated with the psychiatric drug use. But of course, everybody's on the damn drugs, so who knows?
So how do you know? Yeah.
Well, and you mentioned something too about settlements, and I just have mixed emotions about that because I feel like if I'm a $1.3 trillion industry, I'm able to offer some pretty big dollars for you to not take this to court. It's like
So this is an important point, Roy. The pharma industry, in terms of their settlements to federal prosecutors, is the most criminal industry in history. Yeah. They have billions of dollars in settlements every year. Yeah. It's an unbelievable scene, and essentially they are paying everyone off to leave them alone and let them continue doing what they're doing. Yeah. So, I mean, it's
to shut
crazy.
up about it.
What?
And to shut up about it, not say they can't say anything.
When they make a settlement, they don't admit wrongdoing. But
right.
When you give someone $2 billion to stop the prosecution, I mean, it's a rich payoff, and the prosecutors can stand on the pile of loot and say they've saved the world from one of these companies, and I mean, it's crazy. Pfizer has profit margins of 40% for the last 5 years.
Wow.
So if you know anything about industry, a 10% profit margin is a very good profit margin. It's in a competitive industry. But this is in an industry where the money falls out of the sky on healthcare. And Pfizer, for whatever reason, which we won't speculate about, but you can speculate privately about, their profit margins are very high.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
And so how does that, okay, so you mentioned Pfizer, so how does that tie into the COVID vaccination? Maybe.
Okay,
I don't know.
so here, now, I just want to make a comment about doctors and politics,
Okay.
right? So if you go to a doctor and he talks politics to you, that's called a boundary violation. It's not considered cool in medical ethics terms. Just like in polite company, we don't talk about religion,
Right.
politics, or net worth, right?
Right.
It's not considered reasonable. So this vaccine has been kicked around so much, it's being censored by YouTube and all these crazy media people. So I think we can consider the vaccine a political issue. So I'm going to make a comment which will tip you off to what I think about these modern vaccines without specifically commenting on the COVID varieties, right? So we have the two vaccines that have been promulgated in the last 20 years. Now, measles vaccine and all that was before that, and they all have a robust effectiveness, right? But the two are the flu vaccine and HPV. I already told you what I thought of HPV vaccine. Japan rejected it, and they've got a very good public health service that seems less influenced by pharma. But for the flu vaccine, this costs billions and billions of dollars every year. Britain and France stockpile this thing, and their governments are influenced by the manufacturers, obviously, because that stuff doesn't work very well at all. It doesn't do much of anything. It may decrease the length of the severity of the disease by 8 hours or some crazy thing. And this is not a controversial thing. You can go to Cochrane Reviews. You just Google Cochrane Reviews flu vaccine. You can read the summaries of the last few meta-analyses, and they, read between the lines, but it doesn't say the freaking stuff works. It doesn't work very well. It's very expensive. So we can certainly extrapolate pharma's products, which we know a lot about the other products. I mean, these psych drugs, they've tracked the rise in disability very closely. So that is a suggestion that the drugs cause the rise in disability, right? There's a lot of other drugs like the statins that basically are, there's arguable small use cases for it, but they've gone so crazy. We've got 60 or 80 million people in the US on statins, and they are toxic. They can cause an occasional fatality and muscle wasting, a lot of stuff like that. So the only two use cases for that one is hereditary hypercholesterolemia, which means you have a super high cholesterol, and post heart attack. If you're not in those two groups, you're better off doing Roy's method of fasting or being careful with your ketone, or intermittent fasting.
Yeah. So what about a black label or black, I can't remember, I think that's it, like off-label uses, like we designed this medicine for this, because I hear that both ways. I hear there are some medicines out there that help other things they won't let them do, but then I also hear that there are some medicines for one thing that they're using for others that cause harm as well.
Something between a third and 2/3 of drugs are prescribed off-label. So it's completely conventional to do that. The thing that's not conventional is for big pharma to advertise their patented medication for every freaking use under the sun. And there's many, many examples of this in my book, and that's what they get the fines for. That's all that's left on the books to get these guys. Research fraud, they sometimes identify some of that, but it's largely done outside of the country. Those studies are accepted, analyzed inside the country. And that doesn't seem to do much. They put an occasional doctor in jail for a couple of years for that, but they're obvious. They're champion fraudsters, but it's done universally. Again, that Goldacre book is a good source. And I'll mention Whitaker's book about the psychiatrists and the psychiatry. He's a seminal author about that, where he dissects the data and shows that arguably those drugs are if they work, it's for a very narrow group.
Is there any studies on that at all? Do they have to do any research on the off-label, or do they go through a whole new clinical trial for those?
Well, that's the thing. There are, I mean, I suppose you see, clinical trials are done to create a patent, which is a monopoly for whatever it is, 20 years, from the very start of it.
Right.
And that's the profitable stuff. When a drug passes off patent, other companies apply to produce it, right? And then in theory, it becomes a matter of supply and demand and whether the stuff really works, right? But it's not that clear because there are all kinds of lawsuits that that go back and forth between these big groups, the patent drug manufacturers and the generic drug manufacturers, and sometimes they're just paid. The generic drug manufacturers are just paid not to produce the drug. I mean, it goes on and on. I've described that in Butchered by Healthcare. But did that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so,
so there are many good uses. There are many good uses for off-label prescribing, and in fact, a knowledgeable physician does that. And I think that there are many, many treatments that are not recognized because they can't be patented. And among these are bioidentical hormones, because pieces of the human body cannot be patented in theory. They've got some loopholes, like they patent certain doses of these darn things, which doesn't make any sense to me. So you go through what's called a compounding pharmacy, which is 5% or less of the total pharmacists.
Yes.
And they are allowed to make a drug only for one person. They can't mass produce the drug. So, and there are other constraints on those guys too that
Yeah. So let's talk for a minute about, there's so many drugs prescribed, about polypharmacy. And I know that's in theory, if we use the same pharmacy, they should catch that. But I'm going to tell you that we use a national brand and have had some that slip through like nobody's even taken a look at that.
So drug interactions are not studied when the drug is patented. In other words, only one drug at a time is studied, right? So we know something about drug interactions from aftermarket effects and maybe studies that have been done on it. But in the modern nursing home, it's not uncommon to see patients on 20 drugs. And these include that atypical antipsychotic that shortens their lifespan because it shuts them up. I mean, they've got to control them somehow, I guess. But 20 medications is a medication farm and not a patient. They are just farming the revenues. And you can imagine these things, the expense of them and the insurance reimbursement and the insanity of the whole thing. It's just a travesty. There are people who are studying this that I cited in Butchered by Healthcare. And there are specialties that revolve around trying to take people off of as many of their medications as possible.
Yeah.
So if you're a patient and you're not sick, I would advise you just to be very careful about what you take, because the indications for conditions that you can't feel, like blood pressure, have been trumped up. In other words, the standard for when you medicate for blood pressure, there was very little scientific evidence that medicating past the upper limit, 160, or the systolic blood pressure, that trying to get it lower than that, there's very little evidence that it makes any difference. And there's certainly almost no evidence that medicating past 140 systolic makes any difference. And so, especially if you're a senior, it's ridiculous. But the standards have been changed progressively for cholesterol, for blood pressure, for other medical conditions that are medicated prophylactically.
Yeah.
And prophylactically means before you get sick. So, I mean, it's crazy. The whole thing about the bone density drugs, I mean, that's a crazy story. And these things are very toxic, and they create problems of their own, like fractures in certain long bones, like the femur. They create rotting jaw bones, right? And in theory, they densify the bones. Well, they are a net loss, in my opinion, after reading all about it. I mean, it's a crazy, crazy thing. And you get those things and they last years inside your body.
Yeah.
And they're a shot administered in the office, so the doctor gets 25% of the gross revenue.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a conflict of interest nobody can get around.
Well, and some of what led to that too was, it's in the nursing home especially was, when physical restraints, people started taking a hard look at that and they outlawed them. It's unfortunate, but we call it chemical restraints. All they did was just move from having them, tied down in a chair with a belt to chemical restraint of the medication that they give them.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's a good solution for that, but let me just draw a similar point in the insanity field, in the psychotic field, right? Well, almost all psychiatric conditions, and these are defined as things for which there is no laboratory test. So the psychiatrists are going almost purely by their gut instinct and talking, right? Unlike any other medical field. But let's see, I lost my thread. What was I talking about?
No, we were talking about the chemical restraints.
Chemical restraints, right.
Yeah.
Okay, so in psychiatry, every single psychiatric entity, like schizophrenia, like anxiety, like depression, waxes and wanes. It goes up and it goes down, it goes up and it goes down, right? But when we start people on psychiatric medications, it habituates them to the medication and produces chronicity. So this has increased, or it's thought to have increased, the number of people on Social Security, disability, all this crazy stuff. So anyway, that's I don't have an answer for people who are completely out of it, and letting them go through their thing in a locked facility and then letting them out when they're doing okay. That might be the way to go. It's not inexpensive, but the drugs are not inexpensive either.
Yeah. Well, and the bad thing about some of the, worst cases in the nursing home especially was it really wasn't about the patient acting out. It was just if you could medicate enough of them, you didn't have to spend time, devote time and resources to them, unfortunately.
It takes a lot of expertise to carefully medicate these people, and you have to have someone who cares often about people who are demented, and it's hard to get anybody. It takes kind of a saintly person to be interested in keeping these people clean and in the best possible condition.
Yeah.
And there are private places that do a good job, but the usual nursing home medicates heavily. I mean, it's crazy. The pharmacies who supply these nursing homes make millions and millions of dollars per nursing home. I mean, it's crazy. It's like they turn out blister packs for every patient in the nursing home, often 20 medications. I mean, in the hundreds of dollars a month at a minimum for the moderately priced ones, and just rake it in, and the nurses pass them out. And go ahead.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I mean, that's so. What did we do back in the olden days when Big Pharma wasn't in control? I mean, they did send for people with senility and psychiatric issues. They did put them away for a while or a lifetime. But there weren't as many of them because they weren't taking the drugs to be able to cause whatever it is they're upset about.
We've got a control group for psychiatry, and that's called the Third World, right? And they don't have the money to spend on these drugs. So Robert Whitaker and other people have looked at that, and they get better results than we do. Our drugs encourage chronicity and dependency. In the Third World, they lock them up for a while, maybe give them a few drugs, but they don't give them the drugs indefinitely the way our standards have developed to do this. Depression, this chemical fault in the brain that's supposed to be depression, that the SSRI antidepressants are supposed to fix. You've heard about that.
Yes.
Right? It's a chemical deficiency in the brain. Well, that idea was made up by a marketer. There's no science behind that at all. We don't know what the hell is happening in the brain.
Wow.
It's made up by a marketer. So that thing took hold, and once a bell is rung, it cannot be unrung. Right. So everybody in the country thinks that the depressed people have a chemical deficiency in the brain. And that means that you have to take the drug forever and pay the pharma company forever. And, I mean, it all follows, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Made up by a marketer
yeah,
at Smith, Klein and French.
yeah.
Isn't that something?
So, what about allergies? Has this over medication, or maybe it's the food source or whatever that it's? We had a casual conversation about this the other day. That as I was growing up, and I'm not, we'll say back in the '60s and '70s. It's been a while, but there did seem to be kids with the chronic asthma, the chronic allergies, peanut butter, things like that. And it seemed like nowadays there's so
All
much
of
more.
them. All right, yeah, they're all. They can't have dairy. They can't. They have to have everything gluten free, no peanuts, all of that.
I don't have any specific knowledge about that, except for it sounds to me like it's part of the diagnosis creep that has been fostered by industry and abetted by the doctors. Just like for the blood pressure, the cholesterol,
Right.
the bone density. The bone density story is a sick story that started in some medical meeting where they got together and they all decided that a bone density below a certain amount was going to be called osteopenia, which is not true osteoporosis. But then they decided that osteopenia had to be medicated with these toxic drugs to prophylax or prevent osteoporosis, which that link was never proven. But now we got all these people on these drugs. They're getting less popular because their toxicities are more widely known.
Right.
And who wants to have a patient who has a necrosis or a rotten jaw? I mean, but I guess if you're getting paid $2,500 for a shot, maybe you'll risk it.
Yeah.
You get a herd of about 40 of them in there coming in once a month or whenever it is. You got a lot of money on your hands.
Yeah.
So what's a patient to do? Where does a
That's the
patient
hard
go?
part. Okay.
What do you do?
Right. Well, my wife has a chronic problem, and I become her advocate, and it's taken my background to keep her out of trouble, and she's doing very well. But I think that you guys don't have serious problems yourself. I think you can research what you're doing. You stay away from those drugs. Metformin's okay, but the rest of them are not good, and they'll keep you from losing weight. But if you have a complicated problem, you can go to the best doctors in the country virtually now.
Yeah.
And Trump put out this executive order, and I don't think Biden has countermanded it, that said that virtual consultations, even on the first visit, are cool. You get it? Whereas before, they would always insist that you come to the office to see them, to
Right.
see you,
Right.
because it was considered beneath the standard of care to see a patient virtually or on the phone, especially for the first visit. There's something to that. An experienced physician can just look at somebody and they can see physical signs. They can see stuff they can't see as well over Zoom. Although
Right.
these are very clear images, it's not as good. They get your clothes off and look, even without even listening to your lungs or look, just can look them over, and they get hints to what's going on, and they can leap to good ideas about therapy and diagnosis. But you can go to Stanford and you can do a virtual consultation with these people. And if they won't allow a first-time virtual consultation, fly out there, pay for the whole thing, and then do the subsequent visits, and then get your local doctor to do whatever the other guy tells them to do.
Yeah.
So you can get the best care in the country anywhere you live. If you've got a few dollars to rub together. I mean, it's not free, but it's not so outrageously expensive that you can't get it done. The second thing is, the problem with healthcare is twofold, right? Half of them want to do too much. Those are the people on fee for service. And fee for service is enormous conflict of interest, right? It's impossible to get away from. I mean, I was a cosmetic surgeon. I got paid for doing breast augs. I wanted to do them,
Yeah.
And I would like to think I never oversold it on someone that had breasts that were big already or something. But, you got to make the customers happy, right?
Right.
But the problem is, for fee for service, they want to do too much. But the other guys, the HMO guys, they're on salary, and they're often incentivized in various subtle ways to do less. So you got to watch those guys and make sure that you're getting the best care from them. They have all the modern stuff. They can do whatever they want, but it often takes a supervising physician outside the system if you have a complicated problem. If you have cancer, cancer is there. It's many different diseases. It's complicated. Many different specialties are required to manage it. Frequently, you get a cardiologist involved and the cancer doctor, and I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And there's many possibilities. And the thing is an art, which doesn't work very well if it's applied the way the standards go. 2 months of improved survival is what 95% plus of the cancers get from our chemotherapy. And that's not controversial. 2 months survival improvement, right? We can cure about 5 to 7 of these cancers if we catch them at the right stage. It really helps. I mean, look, testicular cancer, some lymphomas, leukemias, some other entities get cured, which is, that's a blessing. But the rest of it, it's definitely an art. And if you establish good relationships with the people, if you don't think that they're relating to you personally, you need to go elsewhere. I mean, doctors are human beings too. Yeah. And if they seem like they're pushing patients through the clinic and that's what they're up to, you can sense it. Your judgment is better than you think. Yeah. And you go on and study everything you can. If you have friends that are nurses or doctors who can help advocate for you and learn everything they can, they possibly will be more sophisticated, although sometimes they are just part of the freaking machine.
Yeah. So we're running way long, but I did want to ask you, you wrote another book about hormones, and so we just wanted to touch on that briefly. I know you talked a little bit about testosterone and estrogen earlier, but kind of what's going on over in that realm?
Well, the interesting thing is, the amazing thing is that every single hormone has been run down by standards groups, right? The FDA there's a thing called a black box warning the FDA puts on drugs that it deems it's a post-market thing, right? They put on, rather than send the drug back to the manufacturer, which would, it's very expensive, and in theory the drug works, they put a warning on the drug so theoretically patients and physicians can be careful about it and not be aware that there are risks. And they put black box warnings, unwarranted black box warnings on testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone based on obsolete drug studies. In other words, the drug studies were done. It's called the Women's Health Initiative, which you probably heard of. That thing evaluated drugs that shouldn't be used any longer for chronic care. Okay, like Premarin. Premarin is horse urine estrogen. Now that stuff has its place, but for chronic care, it has some low-level risks that true estrogen, that's estradiol, which is the compound that should be used, it's bioidentical, doesn't have, right? And there's a whole series of caveats, but basically, and testosterone, it's practically unbelievable what's happened with testosterone. They put a black box warning on testosterone based on 2 studies where they looked through the wrong end of the telescope. In other words, they took people on testosterone and looked for problems. So that's the wrong way to evaluate a drug. What you need to do is take 1,000 people or whatever, half of them on the drug, half of them off the drug, and see what happens to them in the future, right? So testosterone, they stuck this black box warning on testosterone for stroke and heart disease, when this stuff has enormously beneficial effects on weight loss. It's the best weight loss drug we've ever had. It's much better than phentermine. It has many positive effects. And you guys, are of the age group where you should consider this stuff. And you read my book and see what you think. I've got referral sources in there. Okay. And even a drug as harmless as progesterone, which is the other female hormone, there's a story they started about that was you don't need anyway. So it's
the one crazy, that I was given a cream. I mean, when I started going through menopause,
the cream for progesterone is ineffective. It doesn't give you enough active drug.
That's what I felt like. I quit. I mean, I didn't take it very long. Yeah.
You should take oral micronized progesterone, and the doses and everything are in my Hormone Secrets book.
Okay.
So that's something that the women should study. Any woman over 50 should be intimately familiar with all that material, because you're not going to get it. It's going to be hard to get from anywhere else. Yeah. I mean, if you go to the right doctor, they can help. But there's a lot of quote controversy, and the subject's been just completely covered up. Sorry, Roy.
Oh, no. I was thinking, you may actually thought of something back kind of on the drug issue is that, we talk about how things kind of go awry with the FDA looking down over this, but I'm able to walk into any drugstore, any grocery store, and buy any form of some kind of a
Supplements.
and they don't have, and my understanding with them is they have little to no oversight except for the company. So
most of them come from China too.
do they? Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess briefly on that, the benefits versus the pitfalls of walking in, and one for me that I know as that I was told about was iron. Like for most men, too much iron can be more dangerous than low iron.
Don't take iron.
Yeah.
Don't take iron,
Yeah.
Roy.
But yeah.
And Terry, if you don't have menstrual periods, you shouldn't eat iron too.
Yeah.
See, but the reason why you have low iron in the blood is you have blood loss, either through menstrual or if you have a GI bleed, a slow gut bleed,
Yeah.
you can get a low iron.
Yeah.
And if you have that, you want to check it out. You don't want to just take iron.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No. I wasn't taking it. That was
have
just an
colon
example.
cancer.
That was just an example of, one that I know for certain that I've heard is detrimental to men. But then, like some of the others, I've heard that they can have interactions with, certain medications that we're taking. So just, it kind of, the more I've learned about the supplements, kind of the scarier that whole thing is.
And the fish oil, didn't we just learned about fish oil? We cut out the fish oil supplements because we spoke to a neurologist who told us that how it was processes it out of what you need. So to go and get,
they have to cook it at such high heat that it actually makes it detrimental. But you can there's a liquid 3, 6, and 9 that's a lot more. It's more efficient, but it's also
what you
has
need.
all the nutrients that you really need. So little things like that, like who would think, nobody ever talked to me about this whole thing with fish oil. Everybody's like, fish oil is good, but it's the process that kills it.
I'm not expert on fish oil, but I understand it's out. The thing I do know about is vitamin D, which actually is not a vitamin, it's a hormone. And you can get your levels drawn of D. Your primary care can do that, or you can go straight through lifeextension.com and they will, you check out, and for $50, they'll give you a little sheet of paper you can take to any of these labs that are within 2 miles of where you sit right now, and you can get your D levels. And my hormone book describes what they should be, and D does seem to be related to good health. See if you can understand this. We have a study in Sweden, I think, of 275 people. The people with higher D levels had better health. But that doesn't prove that taking D gives them better health. It may just be both are true and it's unrelated.
Yeah.
But it's pretty much harmless. There seems to be some data related to lower COVID severity in people with higher D levels. And so I keep my D levels up. I take D, 10,000 for Roy and 5,000 for Terry a day.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I had a while, back when I started menopause, I think I was deficient in D, and that was one of the things that they gave me as well.
Yeah, and I'm assuming, you can just go to your local doctor, and what we always say is, we're not doctors, we're not prescribing anything for sure, but go to a doctor and get those checked out. It's easy for them to say, where you're at in your limits, whether you need to take something or not.
Well, D is the only one I know about. I mean, there may be some more specialized knowledge about these nutritionalists, but a lot of times the vitamin stuff tends to shade over into alternative medicine. And I'm going to tell you what I think about alternative medicine. I'm going to quote Ben Goldacre as a final thing.
Okay.
What he said was, just because there are problems with aircraft design does not mean that magic carpets fly. You get it? Okay, so I think that throwing your trust for physicians out and substituting with alternative providers is a mistake. Instead, you just got to be a careful consumer of conventional medicine.
Okay.
And there are many, many miracles to be had and good doctors out there, but you've got to be sophisticated because you'll never figure it out without a lot of study.
And if you can find one who has the not alternative. If you
Functional.
can find a functional medicine doctor, that would be good. Yes, somebody who's in
Well,
between.
that's, I really can't speak to that. I understand in theory, they evaluate the whole person. They give a
Right.
lot of personal service and all that stuff.
Fruit-based.
Whether or not, I think it depends on the individual.
Yeah.
I think a lot of them do prescribe bioidentical hormones. So that's an important part of good health in our age group.
Okay. All right. Well, great. So tell us this. What is a habit or something that you do every day that you feel adds a lot of value, either professional or personal? It really doesn't matter.
Well, I'm a lifelong and inveterate exerciser. So
Okay.
And you're a
work
master
out.
climber too. I
Master
mentioned
climber.
mention that.
Some of my editors told me just to cut that out because it makes me sound like I'm an egotist. But I'm proud of that stuff, even
hard
though
work.
I'm long past it. So I exercise. I mean, this book thing for 4 years, it's like I've had an obsessive compulsive attack for 4 years, reading about this stuff and writing about this stuff, learning how to write it, learning how to put it on, these book publication platforms. I did the entire thing myself, including the typesetting, and it's just, the time consumption is just crazy.
Yeah.
But I've been retired for roughly 2 years now, and I started the whole thing 2 years before that and just spent every minute of it working on it.
Well, it's awesome. Well, we appreciate it. And tell everybody, of course, how can they reach out? Tell us what the title of both books are, how they can reach out and get them, and then if they want to reach out to you, how they could get in contact with you.
Okay, so I've got a website. Everything's on the website. For listeners of this podcast, you can, as of now, you can still download both ebooks for free. If you read on physical copies, you're going to have to buy them from Amazon. My website is my first name, Robert, yohoauthor.com, right? And the name of the books are Hormone Secrets, that's my second book, and Butchered by Healthcare. Butchered by Healthcare is a little bit harder, but it's comprehensive. Hormone Secrets is also comprehensive, and I managed to get the writing down to a 9th grade level, which is not easy.
That's
I had
not
to rewrite
easy.
it for months and months
Yeah.
for this kind of a subject. Yeah.
All right, Dr. Robert. Well, thank you so very much.
One last thing.
Yeah.
I'm retired, so you don't have to doctor me ever. You can just
Okay. All right.
Thank you, Roy.
Thanks. Okay. Yeah, we'll be sure and include all the web address and everything in the show notes, so everybody can find you there. But we appreciate you taking time out of your day to be with us. It's been very informative and enlightening.
Oh my
So,
gosh, we could have gone for weeks.
I think the message
There's a
is
lot more, Terry.
we just need to be invested in our own health care and make sure that we're getting the straight information.
Yeah.
And one thing we always say is, if you ever feel like somebody's trying to overdo something, get a second opinion. It's well worth it just to see if everybody's on the same page.
Yep.
All right. That's
Good
going to do
advice.
it for another episode of Feeding Fatty. Of course, I am Roy.
I'm Terry.
You can find us at www.feedingfatty.com. We're also on all the major podcast platforms, iTunes, Stitcher, Google, Spotify. If we're not on one that you listen to, please reach out. I'd be glad to get you added so you can listen to our podcast easier. We're on all the major social media networks. Probably hang out on Instagram a little bit more. We'd love to interact with you over there. Also, a video of this interview will go up when the episode goes live, so you can check that out on our YouTube channel. Until next time, take care of yourself and take care of your health.